Great, thanks. Okay, our agenda that we're going to speaking about today is about the forum and about myself, about the problems that we face, about the people on the streets, the place. I will describe Ferndale and Randburg to you. Then we need to look at the processes that we are doing to address the problem, the resources that we have on hand, other issues that we need to bear in mind, the vision that we have, and then I'm going to issue a challenge to other people, to other areas. If I look at the forum, otherwise known as FRAF, which is a strange number or name, it is actually the Forum of Residents Associations in Ferndale and Randburg. It is an umbrella association. It represents 10 residents associations. It was started last year and its focus is on the area as a whole. And I'm Mary Gillet-de-Klerk. I'm the coordinator or head of the forum. I'm also a qualified and registered social worker. I have experience in working with the homeless in poor communities, prisoners and abused women and children, and I've also started the social work department at a new night shelter in Cape Town and a community centre, training centre for people on the streets. Okay, if we look at the problems that people on the streets create in areas such as Ferndale and Randburg, we need to look at direct problems. Those are the nuisance, the begging on street corners, because it's an irritation to people when they stop their car, stop at a stop street, and it's always that nuisance factor, that nagging thing of there is a problem in my backyard. Mothers and children begging because people feel morally obliged to help the children, but no, it's not necessarily the best route to go. We've also had a death in our river, in the Ferndale Spruit. Of course, that was in the Randburg Sun, and it doesn't create a very good impression because, you know, you're an uncaring community. Well, we are an uncaring community, and it creates pollution in the river because of the fact that they're using it as for toilet facilities to wash in the streams. And this is not happening just in the Ferndale Spruit, it's happening throughout all the rivers of Johannesburg. We've had deaths in abandoned houses, and of course again that went to the press. The bird sanctuary that we have in our area, and there was so much damage to the bird hive that it actually had to be taken down by City Park. So we don't have one in that area. We're now going to have to rebuild one at cost. And it affects the business area because it's bad for businesses, it scares away customers. The public pool in Kensington Beach, there are reports of drunkenness, intimidation of children who are using the pool for swimming lessons because of the fact that they are using it for toilet facilities and also for getting water, because water facilities are getting fewer and fewer and fewer across the city. We have to look at secondary or indirect problems. It is seen as ruining the beautiful surroundings. It's not on. It's affecting house values because the more vagrants and the more street people that are occupying the street corner, the more the whole place sort of gets the veneer or the image that it's going downhill fast. And it affects business profitability. We need to look at who are these people, because it's no good. We have to know who we are actually going to help. So we ask questions like, who are they? Where do they come from? Why are they in the area? What skills and education do they have? Why do they stay in Randburg? And what happened to get them to the state? So each person has a story to tell and tells of their history. But the fact is that we can't, as individual residents, just go up to a street person and grill them about who they are and everything else. And you can only help one person at a time. But we need a coherent and a coordinated effort to deal with all of the people in our area. The response, and I can't laud the Displaced Persons Unit enough, because they came on board, they're busy with the profiling and interviewing and assessing of our area, and this will be ongoing. And I know they are so thinly spread because they're having to go and almost cover the entire Joburg, and 1 million people is just a drop in the ocean probably. And I asked them the other day, or on Monday, what the initial results are showing. And in our Spruit, our Riverland areas, they're mainly South African citizens from Limpopo. So they're from the rural areas, but they're not from, you know, anywhere else in Joburg. In other words, they're rural people. Then our Randburg Methodist Church that offers a soup kitchen, they've been seeing them there. They are mainly from Lesotho and Lesotho nationals, and this has huge impacts in terms of our processes going forward. Our Randburg street people generally have no formal education, which I understand is different from some of the areas on the Braamfontein Spruit, which is a mixture of locals and people from Zimbabwe and other areas, and they apparently have mainly got primary school, some kind of primary school level education. And all of these education levels impact on training possibilities. So we need to be very careful about all of the issues we are looking at. What kind of people are we dealing with, and what are their, sorry, could you just go on? We also have to, as Amanda mentioned earlier, need to look at issues needing attention in dealing with these people. We need to look at xenophobia. We need to look at what is happening and what do we need to deal with in terms of asylum seekers. What kind of training is possible? The impact of health issues such as disability and HIV/AIDS, alcohol users, etc. And then alongside what we're doing in terms of the people on the streets, not too long ago we were approached, the forum was approached by the Chief Public Prosecutor of the Randburg Court and also the Brigadier Hugo from Randburg SAPS to look at starting a pilot project next year called a diversion program. And it basically means that the vagrants, the street people, are accused of bylaw infringements. The police and JPD and other law enforcement, the law enforcement are forced to arrest them because they have committed a crime. They are put into the police cells in Randburg, and then they are due to appear, say they stay there over the weekend, they're due to appear before the Chief Public Prosecutor on the Monday morning. Now, at the moment, 99% of them cannot pay an admission of guilt fine, so then they are processed through the criminal justice system and put into prison for 3 months. And at 3 months or whatever period, they're then back on the streets, back on the same corner, and they're back repeating, and we just have recidivism going on and on and on. So what the idea is that we're in discussions with the Randburg Court to offer them a third option of community service to the accused, which means that their fingerprints will be taken, they won't get a criminal record, as we are told, and they are going to then become a community volunteer. They will then get a bib that says community volunteer, and the idea is that the residents of Ferndale and Randburg will become monitors of their program. They will then pick up that group of people on the Monday morning, and from my point, a shelter would be an ideal place to take them to actually start the process of them doing the community service. They will then clean the river or do something else for 5 hours or 4 hours or whatever they're supposed to do. The end, it will be ticked, and they will be taken back to court, and they will then be released back into the community. But then they have done community service and paid back to the community in which they have committed this crime. Maybe the crime is loitering, or it's urinating in public, or public disturbance, or whatever. And all of that, and once they're at the shelter, they can then be part of the system, so to speak. And, prison really lacks value in this whole thing. So if we look at the places where they are, and Randburg comprises a whole load of residential suburbs: Ferndale, Kensington B, Bryanston Extension 3, Vandale Grove, Beverly Gardens, all areas where people are trying to upgrade their area, look after their properties, and they don't want this blight on the horizon. We also have Stratham Park, which is a light industrial area where you know, people can have seen to be, they're growing like mushrooms in the area. And also the Randburg CBD, which has gone through a period of urban decay, not least because of the presence of the people on the streets. Okay, we also have rivers running through the area, the Spraits, Ferndale and Ferndale Park. We have areas such as the Randburg Saps and Court with vacant properties. We have the taxi rank shopping malls and through roads. We have lots of empty stands and problem properties, and these are havens for vagrants. Now if we look at the processes that we've adopted to date. First of all, in my personal capacity, I wrote in January a proposal for a shelter and training centre, and I sent it to the Executive Director of Community Development for Joburg, Ms. Police Witwala Tal. I based it on my own experience and the fact that I thought we actually do need shelters. Now people say, why shelters? We can't just provide homes and, you know, from these people. Shelters are temporary places of residence. They are not permanent places to stay and live. And I know of the Haven Night Shelter organization in Cape Town that operates a chain of night shelters throughout Cape Town. They're a standard model that gets basically cookie cut across the city, and it means that people know that they're going to get exactly the same thing if they go to Linden, or if they go to Ferndale, or if they go to Berea, or whatever. So we don't end up with a luxury one here and a basic one somewhere else. And this is important, that we develop policies that are standard and everybody knows what they're going to get. I also then spoke to the people from the Craighall Park and Craighall Residents Association and their efforts along the Braamfontein Spruit, and these discussions gave me huge hope. I was then asked by the forum to actually send a formal request for a shelter and training centre, and I can't tell you the response from Ms. Twala and her team and all the people that she's got going. It's just yielded immediately amazing results. Knowing also that, you know, we have to do something in Randburg because the resources, the shelters are far away in Rosebank, Hillbrow, Joburg, CBD and Berea, and no vagrant or street person from Randburg is going to trek all the way across town to go to the only shelter that is there. We have to start developing ones in our local environments. And if we look at the next slide, we also have to look, we've held meetings with the Displaced Persons Unit, Social Development, police and the residents to discuss the issues. We've connected with churches who are offering soup kitchens. Now the Randburg Methodist Church, I'm citing an example of that. They don't just offer the soup kitchen. They've got ablution facilities where they can shower and where they can wash their clothes, a line to hang it up so that they can, you know, and this is all part and parcel of their offering there. They've actually offered to start a training centre early in 2012 because they have the facilities, they have a ready group of people who are there. Now connecting with the churches who are already starting to look at issues of what they are doing and trying to coordinate this. So it's, they maybe can do, I do it on Monday, you do it on a Tuesday, you offer soup on a Wednesday, and so we're no longer operating in silos. The Joburg Property Company, through the Social Development, has provided lists of Joburg-owned properties where possible shelters could be located. And then if we look at our immediate direct actions, the DPU is busy profiling, the churches are starting to coordinate efforts, training centre is due to start in 2012, and the Joburg Property Company owned properties are looked at for a shelter. If we look at a shelter, this is a temporary step in terms of the rehabilitation of people. It's not a permanent solution. We need to identify a shelter location. We need to form a steering committee. We need to adopt the policies that are adopted for Johannesburg, and it's important that this group look at developing a singular policy. That it means that because we're going to challenge Linden, Blairgowrie and all the areas around us to equal or better what we are doing. And if each area does what they can in their area, but they have a basic handbook, they have a basic handbook of how to start a shelter, etc. It means it becomes easier to manage. You're partializing the problem down into manageable bits, and we're also dealing with them in manageable bits across the city. We need to draw up our budget and start in terms of startup and maintenance costs. We need fundraising for the shelter. We have to note in terms of a shelter, and in Cape Town, the homeless pay a nominal overnight fee. There is no free night that you can get. So even if it's 50 cents or 1 rand, you know, if they've sold their pack of newspapers or whatever, they all bring in a little bit. It means that it's their dignity. They're not just getting handouts. They're paying for their overnight accommodation. And the free nights can be only got with a voucher, and I'll come to that in a minute, if they have done community service, in other words, they've paid their way in kind, or if they're engaged in some form of training. Then if we look at the training centre, the plan is to start it in March 2012. The aim is to make use of the homeless and make these, as users of the centre, sustainable, and of the training centre. We're looking at vegetable gardening to start with, even if it's going to be rooftop vegetable gardening. We're looking at, because most of our group of people that we've identified thus far have no education, so they're basically on the recycling level. So we're actually going to look at something that incorporates recycling, but that has an end product. Also, we have to be careful to meet market needs. It's no good training everybody as a beader, because there are thousands of beaders all across the country, that's the city. We need to do needs assessment, and we're going to do that in Stratham Park. And if businesses in Stratham Park need people to do X job, they will be trained to do X job. In other words, they can meet that. We also have to be very careful in terms of placement, and this is where Men at the Side of the Road and other different organizations have proved very useful. We have to be careful not to ensure that somebody maybe works here one day and then somewhere else and the following day somewhere else, so that they're not employed by a single employer, especially until they have a track record of being able to keep a job. Because so many of them have fallen off the planet for one or other reason, they have no longer got a standard work ethic. And we actually have to start at that point to actually, and I'm not talking about nannying anybody, we have to take where those people are at now, and we have to ensure that they start developing, you know, that they will be on time, they will do this, etc. And the training gives them the start of that. But we also have to make sure that we are not offering our homeless people a chance in life, that we have to also look at another area of our generally unemployed people in the area. We have huge unemployment across the city, and especially in poorer areas. If you're going to start offering a service with a training centre and everything else for people who are found to be on the streets, and they qualify in all those categories, imagine the general unemployed person who cannot find a job, the young person who is struggling to find employment. So we're going to have to start looking at those kind of issues. The other issue in terms of training centres, we are going to have to start looking at the places of origin. And this we can do via the churches. If somebody's coming from Lesotho, then we have to get the churches in to go and speak to the churches in Lesotho to ensure that they start trying to develop programs at source, so that we don't start attracting more people into the areas. And you know, one can use fair trade, you can use all kinds of other programs that are in existence in these areas, but there's little being done in those areas, and one has to ensure that the pool of places where they are coming from and being drawn to Johannesburg or any big city. And just to put you in the picture, it's not just Joburg that has this problem. Areas like London, Chicago, New York have actually almost called it, you know, put their hands up in horror and said, I'm sorry, we have far too many people on the streets. We can't deal with it. It's a problem too big for us, and we just actually almost want to walk away. So we have to make sure that we manage our people on the streets now before we develop a greater crisis. We also have to look at the categories of, and I'm going to call them vagrants because that is what they're known as by the residents of the area. And one's got to be careful that you don't try and call them all nice things when people actually feel that they are a nuisance. And it's a public education process to actually say to residents, I'm sorry, you can wish all you like, we can have the police go and do raids, they will arrest them, put them into the cells for the night, and they'll be back there tomorrow. We have to deal with a solution to the problem. We also have to look at what's separating South African citizens from foreigners, not in terms of a xenophobic approach, but in terms of their needs are different. But we have to look at able-bodied locals who can do things. We have to look at the temporary disabled, such as people on crutches. They're only going to be on crutches for 6 months. What can they do in those 6 months that they can be trained, but they may need to be retrained later on in terms of something when they are now able-bodied? The skills levels issues I've mentioned before. The sick and ailing, the impact of HIV/AIDS, alcohol and drugs, and we need to get projects going in the places of origin. Then if we look at 2012 and the general needs, it is important to have a full database of displaced persons. And whether they come into when they come into the shelters, they get a card and they become like card-carrying displaced persons. And it's not a form of a dompas, it's not a form of anything else. It's basically so that if they are working in Ferndale today and they've got secure work in Craig Hall Park tomorrow, they can go to that shelter without having to go through the whole profiling process with a social worker, because it's important to have social workers attached to these shelters to do the profiling and to start the rehabilitation process of that person in that shelter, so that they're not becoming a permanent just walk in person and there is nothing further that is planned ahead. We need to look at, and the social worker can help them get the ID books, replace them to new documents. The foreigners need helping too, but they need helping in a gentle kind of way, because they are very suspicious of what's gone on in various communities. They've been left the community because they felt fearful, and now they're really on the street somewhere else in Joburg. So they're basically trying to disappear into the shadows. The sick homeless need a hospice-type room in a shelter. And this means that we can deal with them in the area that they know of. It's no good just taking all the sick homeless and going to put them into I'm using Tara as an example because it's a big institution, and saying that they need to be taken halfway across Joburg. They need to be dealt with there and then, because their buddies, their friends on the street are their support system, and they are important in terms of their own rehabilitation, because taking them like a fish out of water somewhere else is not going to help their either their death, because a lot of them are so ill they're going to die, and they need to die with dignity, surrounded by friends, not in a cold institution halfway across town. The standard shelters and training centres, we need a chain of them across the city, run by the city, so that it's it can be run in assistance with and a memorandum of understanding that shelter is a Joburg run thing, but it is run in conjunction with a church. It means, because I found this out in the past, the Haven went through a problem period in its development where it almost outsourced everything. Then they found that 2 or 3 shelters kind of developed their own ideas and paid, etc. And it was like letting the genie out of the bottle, because you had management committees that were basically uncontrollable. And it's important to have, now they've brought them all under the same wing, and they've all now, you know, they've got to adhere to a whole set of criteria. So, and this is important, and it's important if it's run by the City of Joburg. They have the facilities. We have then the access easier to a whole range of other departments that can assist. So that is my challenge to everybody. The vision that we have, the resources that we have in the area are already the churches, the NGOs already in the field, the City of Joburg, the various departments. Can't laud them enough. Ward councillors who support you know, and are there on the ground. The South African Police Service. We've got excellent relations with SAPS Randburg. The big issue and homeless talk, and I might just mention, I don't know if all of you are aware, that in the big issue, and this is why I like it so much, it's a readable magazine that people will buy and want to read, the average resident of Joburg. It is not just a little broadsheet. It is an actual, really well-respected magazine. Now, in the middle section, on the middle pages, they take the big issue seller, who gets a portion of the sales of each magazine, that the person who's sold the most or selling on a regular basis gets a profile put in there on, you know, Alice so-and-so, who's been on the streets of X, the street corner, and it's a story about her, where she comes from, why she's landed up on the streets, etc., how long she's been selling the big issue. And because of that, people have picked up and phoned the big issue and said, can we get a reference from Alice? I need somebody to come and work in, her training is in this, and people have got work, permanent work through that. And that to me is an important aspect that we have to do, and we could get people involved with the big issue. I don't see it enough on the streets of Joburg. And I think it's important that they are properly validated, they've got a card that says they're a big issue seller. So it's all very organized. And the big issue is part of a worldwide big issue magazine, and has also part of the Street People's issues worldwide. And I might tell you that South Africa sent a team last year to the Street People's soccer tournament worldwide that was held in Brazil. And that is what we've got to start encouraging hope. We've got to start looking at what can we do with our street people. They're not hopeless cases, and that is essential. And we also need residence assistance with the training centre. I'm thinking of the use of a lot of retired people who could come and train people in such an I know I've gone on a little long, but I just quickly want to tell you what the Department of Labour used to do, and I think it should be encouraged, or we could do the same again. We used to send people to the Department of Labour. They were trained as gardeners or as bricklayers, and they were given at the end of a week's thing, and the training they then went on to get that, they were given a certificate. It meant that at the back of that it said, this is what John is trained to do. Trained to distinguish weeds from grass, from, you know, etc. So when somebody actually employed John, they knew what they could do, and one could get residents to actually sponsor packs that could be put in big gym, carry cases of basic gardening equipment that they could use as the, you know, one-man band gardener. Okay, the vision that we have, a chain of night shelters throughout Joburg using the same model. Training centres attached to shelters. Shelter passports sold to the public to give vagrants, give to vagrants into food or drink, etc. This is needs a public education process. In Cape Town, they sell books of tickets that you give, and you encourage to give somebody a ticket to a shelter as opposed to giving the money on the street corner. And this is taking on in Cape Town. And you've got different books for, you know, you can get also for the children, so that the children can take it, they can give it into the shelter. And the restaurants and supermarkets are giving past sell-by date bread or vegetables, etc., which are used to the soup or bread, which cuts down the cost. And again, the training needs to be linked to market needs. Now, before we start the next phase, because we're not here just to talk about a talk shop, we're actually here to put into action. Here are some quotes that I want to read to you. There is much suffering in the world, physical, material, mental. The suffering can be blamed on the greed of others. The material and physical suffering is suffering from hunger, from homelessness, from all kinds of diseases. But the greatest suffering is being lonely, feeling unloved, having no one. I've come more to realize that it is being unwanted, that it is the worst disease that any human being can experience, and that comes from Mother Teresa. And Neil Young, the singer-songwriter and social activist, said, all these people talking about morality should just walk downtown. They don't want to go downtown because instantly they see homeless people and they don't want to. And then Michael Zaslow, who's also an actor, said, people will sooner help aid a sick dog lying on the sidewalk than try to find shelter for a sick person. It's too much to deal with. And Susan Sarandon says, if you walk down the street and see someone in a box, you have a choice. That person is either the other, and you're fearful of them, or that person is an extension of your family. And that makes you at home in that world and not fearful. So really, it's very self-serving. So I ask you, please help our fellow Joburgers, those on the street, to get shelter, food, water and clothing, training in order to find them work for themselves, to regain their dignity and self-worth, and become wanted members of our community. And before I say thank you very much, I want to show you one. My son was asked to do an artwork called, the title was Stranger in the Village. And this is based on the fact that are double strangers. And we have to look, if we look, ask all of our residents of Joburg to look behind the curtains and not be fearful of what they will see. They might see somebody that looks ugly, that looks disabled and is on the street. But he is not a stranger in our village. He is part of our community and he needs help as much as the rest of us do.
Mary, thank you so much. We're running. I don't want to stop you because it was just so interesting. I'm sure everybody here learned a lot. I learned a lot. I do want to give people an opportunity. I'm sure there might be a few questions. I want to give an opportunity for people to ask questions. Before you do, I just wanted to say that I love the idea of the free nights that is earned through service to the community, that kind of thing. I love the idea of giving people vouchers instead of money, because that is one of the things that we brought up in the previous workshop, the fact that people giving money and people giving handouts sometimes actually exacerbates and perpetuates the situation instead of resolving the problem. I love the fact that you spoke about the physically disabled. We haven't dealt with that yet, but we have to deal with that. The big issue, more people should be buying it. We should be encouraging them to sell it, even in some of our stores, in our business nodes, in our communities. And the fact that you've had so much success with the department for community development, I'm very excited to hear more about that. So what we're going to be doing is, if with Mary's permission, we can send people a copy of your presentation, and we can also try and obtain some more information about what's going on in terms of the Haven shelters, and let us try in our communities to set those up.